Welcome to Moneyballers, inside the college front office. We're your hosts, Nick Sisko and Luke Bogus, co-founders of Dropback. With the revenue-sharing era of college sports upon us, championship-caliber teams will be fueled by creative, competitive, collegiate front offices. Here on Moneyballers, we'll be learning from the brightest minds and emerging innovators in the new college front office, with the goal of equipping our listeners with tools and tips to give your teams a competitive edge.
Today's guest is Gaizka Crowley, the general manager at Arizona. Having started his career as a high school football coach and then a teacher at Florida, Gaizka moved into college football with Exos Digital, it's now Catapult, as their Midwest director of scouting, then made the jump to the team side as a DPP at Southern Illinois University. After stops at UNLV in Western Michigan, he's now with the University of Arizona as their general manager since February of last year. This is an awesome conversation, a real treat to have Gaizka on the podcast, and let's do it. Gaizka Crowley, GM at Arizona. I'm pumped to have you on the podcast. Thanks for taking the time.
Of course. Thanks, Luke, for having me. I really appreciate the invite.
Yeah, man. Well, what's really interesting is GMs are like all the rage right now. Everyone seems to be hiring for that position, but this is actually your second GM stint. You were GM at Western Michigan. Maybe walk me through how has the GM role changed from when you got that title a couple years ago even to what it is now. Maybe like walk me through that progression between those two schools.
Yeah, I think the biggest thing is just the way the landscape of the sport has changed, right? Like fundamentally, like our job will always be, identification, evaluation, recruiting, and then roster evaluation, right? No matter what school you're at or your title, what I think has changed is the format of how the sport's set up. Pre-COVID, COVID, and then post-COVID is kind of how I look at how the landscapes have changed. I really enjoyed my time in Western Michigan. Lance Taylor was the head coach there. He's a fantastic young coach. I think the world of him, and obviously Brett Brennan's our head coach here in Arizona, and really gracious and grateful of the opportunity I have here. But they are very different, right? Obviously different schools, different conferences, different parts of the country. It's really a year-to-year thing based on until we get some little more firm guidelines and be able to repeat processes year to year. You gotta keep your knees bent and get ready to change whenever we need to.
Yeah, for sure. And like you kind of mentioned like the pre, during, post COVID, that kind of lines up with your career path too. Like you've been in this DPP, like roster evaluation role pre, during, and post. And so like, how has your day-to-day changed? Obviously the titles changed, but has your approach to evaluation changed? Has your approach to, obviously your job duties have expanded, but just maybe walk me through like how you thought about roster construction pre and then during the collective era and now thinking about the rev-share era.
Yeah, I think the fundamentals are the same, right? And the way you evaluate prospects, so for us, like a lot of teams, but we're going to be extremely focused on our critical factors. We're going to be extremely focused on multi-sport athletes, extremely focused on the character of the kid and what we're bringing into our culture. I don't think that's changed. What has changed, the biggest thing is just the volume, where pre-COVID, you were really only looking at high school players, junior college, and then potentially grad transfer here and there, where now it's the college market, it's the JC market, and it's the high school market. So the volume is way different. The fundamentals will always be the same in the evaluation, but then also your roster building. The joke used to be with the coaches, right? Is how many running backs am I taking or how many offensive linemen am I taking? Pre-portal, you kind of had an idea based on graduation and NFL enrollees. But now it's like I tell my coaches, hey, I can give you a projection and that's going to change probably tomorrow and it'll probably change again the next day. So that's kind of the biggest differences, the fundamentals being the same, but the way you build a roster, you project a roster is way different than it used to be.
Yeah. And as you mentioned, like the volume has changed. And I assume to manage the volume, the staff has changed too. Walk me through the evolution of the departments that you oversaw, I guess who you reported into when you were a DPP, then what you oversee at Western Michigan, and then what you oversee, or what are you overseeing currently at Arizona? Because like, how are you managing the scale? I assume it's more people, more orgs, more structure, but maybe like walk me through how you're planning for that scale.
Yeah, so I kind of have a small school background. So like you said, I started at Southern Illinois FCS, a really small staff. I was the only person, right, off the field. So it was just me, right, me and the head coach. So in my kind of career, as I've grown, you do get used to the staff size change. I think the biggest thing though is really setting it up so that people have a clear understanding of what their jobs are. And who does what, when do they do it, what's the expectations. I think that's the biggest thing. And no different than managing a team in any other, business, where I feel like maybe the DPP or the director of scouting 5 years ago or 10 years ago, it was more, the work, right? The actual football aspect now, where I think for where I pride myself and somewhere I kind of try to improve always is being a manager, right? Handling people, personalities, being organized, being resources. We have a team of awesome young interns in the back here at U of A that, we do scout schools with our director of scouting, Fletcher Kelly, and try to take care of those young people and help them in this business too. So that's something that I really take pride in. But truly being a manager, truly overseeing and being a resource for the whole department is something that I think is really, really important. Not just, hey, I'm a good scout, or hey, I'm a good recruiter, or hey, I have a lot of high school connections. That's part of it, certainly. But making sure that you can manage the department is also critical.
Yeah. And I mean, that's just always an interesting battle in organizations. Just like you were DPP, you were thinking all about this really nitty gritty scouting and watching tape. And then now you're overseeing those people and you want to probably continue to do that, but you don't have time. You have to scale your talents. And by doing that, you have to kind of empower the folks below you. You kind of mentioned the core values and stuff that like the fundamentals are the same about recruiting talent. Like now that you're kind of in that pie in the sky role and you have direct reports, how are you translating those core values and those core tenets? Because you're not going to watch all that tape. It's going to be your teams. How are you kind of translating that as your, roles evolve and you could do less of the tape watching? How do you translate that to the teams that you oversee?
Yeah, I think the biggest thing starts with the head coach, right? The alignment between the head coach and myself. And what I always tell our people is we need to watch players with the coach's eyes. Like that's our job, right? My job isn't to find the best players that I like the most. My job is to find the best players for the University of Arizona that fit our culture and what our head coach wants. So then what I try to do is tell the people underneath me, and then hopefully it goes down throughout the levels, is that these are the things we're looking for. So when I first got here February last year, meeting with all the coaches, getting a feel for what they want, so that then I can tell my people from director of scouting all the way down to first day student assistant. And that takes time, it takes trust, and it takes some time to get on the same page with what we're seeing. But I do really think that's critical. That alignment from the head coach to the coaches to me to my staff is really critical. So it's something we spend a lot of time on with scout schools and developing those people, because at the end of the day, if we could have 100 staff members, but if we're all watching different things and we all prioritize different things, we'll have more guys watch. But at the end of the day, that's not what it's about. It's about finding the right players for us with our culture, scheme, city, community.
How much of that teaching and trying to find the culture, the community, those fits, how much of that is training the eyeballs and the brain to think that way versus injection of certain types of data? Like, I guess, like how much do you balance the R&D versus just the pure play film plus scouting report?
I tell people, and I tell my guys all the time, like we don't draft players, like we recruit. So at the end of the day, you're going to have to convince someone to give their child to the University of Arizona. Right. And so whether that's grandma or mom or dad or whomever, so there will always be a recruiting relationship component to this. It's something that I think our staff does really well. It's something I think Coach Brennan does really, really well. He's been known as a great recruiter his entire career. So that's critical. I tell my guys, like, you can watch film all you want, but at the end of the day, if you can't go out there, create relationships with people and be impactful to them on a visit or over the phone or a Zoom, that's critical. So I tell them, hey, take 30 less minutes watching film in the back and spend that time calling high school coaches or calling recruits, developing those relationships. So that's always the human aspect. And then obviously you've got the football aspect, right? The scouting, the film evaluations, the cut-ups, those kind of things. There are plenty of players out there, right? There's thousands, literally thousands of high schools and college. The most important thing is to find the right players for your organization. So that's what I'm really, really focused on. That starts with the film, that starts with the physical traits and the production. But at the end of the day, it's got to be the person that we allow in this building is most critical in that process.
Totally agree. You kind of mentioned it that the fundamentals are the same, even though the approach, adding money into all this equation with roster building and the rev-share era, the fundamentals are the same. Is there anything broadly that you do see changing about your role or your approach in post-house when you are given a percentage of the cap to be able to allocate? Like, what are some other like tactics or just things that you are thinking about in this post-house era for roster construction?
Yeah, I think you have to, right? Where traditionally you knew what your roster was and you could project it out years over years, and there wasn't that much change. Like you'd have a guy here and there, but where now what we really try to pride ourselves in is we want to project as much as we can in our roster, whether that be financially or position based, but then also understanding that change happens. So to your answer to your question earlier about like what is my day to day, like that's a huge part of it is not just what does my roster look like in the spring or what does our roster look like in the fall, but next spring. And it's not just, hey, how many running backs, but there is the financial obviously component to it that you kind of have to balance. So continue to work with the head coach and continue to working with the staff. I do think that that is really important so that you can kind of project those things because there is so much uncertainty. You have to be ready for the changes that will come up. And my job ultimately is to help our program and put the best team we can of it, together, no matter what that looks like from now till, August when we kick off.
Yeah. One obvious change that I see, anyway, I think we may or may not have ran into each other at this event, but there was Inside the League hosted a symposium during the combine. It was a great panelist of GMs, and in the crowd was a bunch of GMs, aspiring GMs, personnel folks, etc. What really struck me as we're talking kind of this post-house change is it was a 3-hour event. First hour panel, last 2 hours was networking. The GMs marched off the stage, and all the agents in the crowd flocked to the GMs. And, I don't know what they were talking about, but I can presume that it was talking about clients and trying to get deals done. I think generally speaking, this emergence of agents, you mentioned that your job is still to recruit, to convince a family to have your child go to the University of Arizona, but also there's this additional factor, agents. Curious just generally, how has that been? Has that changed things about that recruiting workflow and trying to get that yes? Walk me through that addition to this whole equation.
Yeah, it definitely has, right? I think traditionally in recruiting, people talked a lot about finding the champion of that recruitment. So that might be high school coach, that might be trainer, that might be mom, uncle, brother, where now you absolutely still need to do that, but there is an agent component to it. And balancing the conversations with the agents, but then also making sure that you're having those touch points with the family and touch points with the kid. So obviously, we'll work with agents when needed, but this, we obviously want to make sure that the kid and the family are being kind of part of that process as well. So I was at that event at the combine and was able to meet people that I had maybe had a phone call with or a text conversation with. So that was good. Because a lot of that too is for us, I want those guys to know what we're looking for. I do want to have healthy relationships. I do want to work well together. We're certainly not going to always agree on how good I think a player is or, those kind of things. But I do think ultimately having those relationships, those open lines of communication are important. But then, they obviously have a job to do and I have a job to do. And then making sure that, we respect that, I think is really important. It's something that I try to do. But I think those people coming in and there's, obviously when you look online, there's all kinds of stories of, is it good for the game? Is it bad for the game? And that's kind of not my decision to make. Ultimately my job, like I said, my job is to find the best players that we can find for us. But it's definitely part of it, and it's new, but I kind of, to me, it's exciting also because it is new that you're able to kind of find your way in and kind of do things the way that you want to do them for your school. And there's not, 25 years of precedent. So I kind of find that exciting as well.
Yeah, that is definitely the exciting part. And I think as far as new goes, there's a lot of new agents, and we're not at the point yet where we have an NFLPA certified process for those agents, which again, that's another conversation on how and when that should happen. But just generally speaking, of the agents that you talk to, what tips do you have for agents listening to this podcast about the best ways to interact with GMs? What would you recommend?
Yeah, I don't think they realize how small my world is, right? And at different schools and my, whether you're a GM or a DPP, again, whatever your title is, that doesn't really matter. We have a really small circle. We talk all the time. Players, coaches, agents. I think my nickel's worth of advice for agents is to realize when you have a conversation with school A and a conversation with school B, those two people probably know each other and know that if there's information that's not being spoken, that's not true, we're going to find out pretty quickly. So I think that's a part of it. I think the other thing too is, I have people reach out to me, and the majority of them I may not even know, but I think having a feel for what the team wants or what the team's looking for and not just, hey, here's my list of guys that are in the portal, I think it goes a long way because I get those lists all the time when portal season opens up. But the biggest thing is if you want your guy kind of at the top of the stack, if you will, if there's connections, if there's certain relationships with coaches or there's team fits, those kind of things, that definitely helps rather than just different than a high school coach, right? If you're a high school coach, which I was in a different life, if you're a high school coach and you've got a feel for what the college is looking for and you can get that prospect to that college, that goes a long way rather than just sending out your bulk list and seeing what sticks.
So agents is definitely one piece that's changing post-house. I think another interesting facet to all this is, post-house, there's a cap. In that cap, teams are given a percentage of that cap, and your job is to make every dime of what you're allocated count. And so what's really interesting is that there's going to be this correlation between how the team spent and how it went at the end of the year. Are you thinking about that? / is there any new KPIs or new things that you're thinking about how at the end of the year you need to report back to the AD, you need to report back to the fans or to the donors even that are helping kind of fund this engine? Do you think about that aspect of this whole part, or are you more focused on just money as a means to win on and off the field and who cares what other people say because this is our philosophy and you're either ride or die with Arizona? Which on the spectrum is it?
Well, I think that goes to alignment, like we talked about earlier, right? So the initial alignment between me and the head coach, Coach Brennan, but then also the alignment with our athletic director, Desiree Reed Francois, her kind of team. If you have that kind of bunker mentality, I do think it's limiting in a lot of ways. At the end of the day, if you look at the best organizations, there is alignment from top to bottom and left to right. So they do a great job. Desiree's really, really progressive in a lot of different ways in this space. She's kind of ahead on a lot of the committees and groups. So she's able to really have information to us that kind of helps our day-to-day. So I think that's really important. I'm really appreciative of her in that way. But I think we have to, because at the end of the day, I work at the University of Arizona. I really enjoy it here. Like, my family's here. Like, I want to be here for a long time. But at the same time, I do believe that we're stewards of this program for the fans and the community and the alumni and the former players. So I want to make sure that we're doing things the right way. And I think you have to be ultimately self-critical, right? If we're making financial decisions or we're making personnel decisions no different than 50 years ago, like, you're going to evaluate your own roster. You're going to see where decisions were made that worked or decisions were made that didn't work, why that happened, and then try to see how can I apply that to the next recruiting class or the next team. So I think that's really critical. Different things we're doing, like I said, evaluating our own roster. We're in the middle of spring ball right now. So that's a daily thing, talking with our coaches and talking with our strength staff and our training staff and figuring out how all these different departments can come together to evaluate our roster to help make the best decisions for it to ultimately be successful. So I do think that that's really important. Like you said, not having the bunker mentality. And the other thing too is we're so new into this. Like, I'm trying to learn conversations like this and events at the Combine or the Senior Bowl or with NFL executives, meeting with different NFL teams that I've had a chance to do in the fall and this spring has been really, really good for my personal growth, but then also the growth of the department of trying to figure out, okay, what's the best way to do this? I'm certainly not saying that I have the best processes, but I think we're all trying to figure it out. And there's a lot of different ideas and there's a lot of different ways to do things. Whether you're East Coast team or West Coast team or different levels, that's what's important, is how do you find out the way to be the most successful at the place that you are at? Because every job is different, every city is different, every school is different.
Yeah. And on that vein of like personal growth, it's really cool that like I feel like a big career aspiration for a lot of folks that are like enjoy business, love sports is like, I want to be an NFL GM someday. I want to be an NBA GM someday. And now we're entering an era where you could be a college football GM. You could be a college basketball GM. So overnight, we're getting from 32 potential opportunities to become an NFL GM to 100 plus perhaps. For the folks that are listening that do like for the folks listening, being that aspiring GM, like that's their life and their career goals. Like, you've reached the mountaintop, so to speak. There's a lot to learn, but what would you say to the people that are starting the climb, the folks who are aspiring to be GMs? Like, maybe like what's one or two tips of advice from your years of experience plus your last couple of years as the GM title? What wisdom would you impart on the folks trying to become a GM someday?
Yeah, that's a great question. I think it is so new. I started my career, like I mentioned earlier, as a high school coach, and I was a teacher. I got into the recruiting service side, then to the small college, and kind of worked my way up. So I have a little bit of a different path than a lot of my peers, which is something that I kind of celebrate and I'm proud of. I think the biggest thing is at the end of the day, you're a manager, like I said earlier, and how you treat people, how you take care of people, how you manage people is critical, right? You can be the best scout in the world, but like if you don't get along and you can't delegate and you can't work well with others to see the future and see how all the puzzle pieces come together, like you're going to be limited. So whether that's, if you're a data person or if you're a cat person or a relationships recruiting person, whatever your personal skill set is. So making sure the management, the organizational aspect is strong, I think is really critical. And then I think the other part of it is at least in the college world, obviously the NFL has been around a long time, but being open to change and open to new ways of doing things. So like if you go on Twitter, you're going to get a million different opinions of the basketball portal and the football portal. And I tell myself all the time, I'm blessed to be in the spot. I'm super grateful for this opportunity, and I'm going to change with the way that the industry changes. And do I agree with everything? Of course not. But this is providing incredible opportunities. Something that I'm really passionate about, right, is these jobs have created more opportunities for great personnel people, great recruiting people, great ops people, like on the chief of staff side, that in my opinion were overlooked traditionally. They didn't make much money. They didn't have multi-year contracts. They didn't have cool titles. They weren't able to go to the Senior Bowl, the Combine, right? Like that's what I think is really cool is hopefully one day every college team has a GM and there's assistant GMs. And if that creates more jobs and opportunities for me at 25, then that's what this thing's about. So that's something that I'm really excited about. I take pride in, like I mentioned earlier, kind of trying to help school up the young folks. But I think that's the big thing is it's all, at the end of the day, it's people, right? The football is relatively easy. Like the people is usually the hard part of your day to day. So really pouring into that, and then you got to be a master of your craft, whether that's scouting, data, app, recruiting, whatever aspect it is.
Yeah, I think that's an awesome note to end on. Gaizka, seriously, this was so fun. Appreciate the opportunity and thanks for the time.
Of course, man, anytime. I appreciate what you're doing and conversations like these are really exciting. So I appreciate you having me and bear down.
Cool. We'll do it again soon. Thanks.
Thanks, man.
Thanks for tuning in to Moneyballers. Don't forget to subscribe wherever you listen to your podcasts. Plus, leave us a review. And if you'd like to be a guest on the show, just email us at hello@dropback.com.